It's Nerdy, and welcome back to the Transmissions Draft League, season number 4. We are wrapping up and recapping the week number 2 matches. We had a ton of sweeps this week, which means that it will thankfully be a little bit easier for me to go through the recap. But of course, let's go ahead and dive right on in. First up, we had our match versus the 10-star team. Of course, this was a rematch from Season 3's Grand Finals, so as expected, it was a great 3-game set. I did want to point out that this game was pretty short despite being 3 games, and definitely could have ended in a sweep. So your Bewares actually ended up winning the first game, and then in the second, a couple of bad rolls and a couple of missed calls does end up losing us the game there. And in game number 3, we made the correct call but forgot to use the Terra on Iron Crown, which does end up losing us the game. All of that being said, I think that it was still a great match from both sides, and even though I do like to nitpick and take out my own misplays and missteps a little bit more than everybody else, I'd say that it was still a reasonable game from us. Obviously, we saw the power of Iron Crown that didn't get any chance whatsoever to shine in week 1, so glad that we actually got to see that. I think that despite the numbers, I think Golden Go wasn't actually as big of a problem as the numbers say. I think had we handled Iron Crown a little bit better, Golden Go was not an issue for our team. It was more so just that in games 2 and 3, we didn't handle Iron Crown correctly. That being said, like I said, I'm still happy with the performance. I'm still happy with where we are for the season. It's only 2 weeks in. We've got 5 more left to go. And hopefully that does mean that we will continue to stride towards a winning season and hopefully make the playoffs. Yeah, I still think that there's a lot to be happy with. But that is, of course, one of the predictions that we got wrong. And from here on out, it is nothing but sweeps. So the Season 4 sweepers do just that and sweep the duo blades. I did want to point out that there was a lot of very strange sets from Universality. Now, this can happen sometimes when people come from a singles background into a doubles format where the sets don't necessarily make sense, or if somebody is less experienced with Pokemon overall. Of course, we are pretty competitive here, so it does stand out a little bit more. But yeah, overall, I'd say that Universality kind of brought a lot of weird sets that just didn't really have a chance of working out. And of course, the sweepers ended up capitalizing on that. In the final game for the Dark Division, we had the Charge Beams versus the Bit Breakers, and of course the Bit Breakers did end up getting revenge for their week 1 loss and swept the Charge Beams. This is a really odd spot for JKG to be in. I don't know if I've ever seen him lose 2 weeks in a row, especially in a sweep, so definitely needing to turn it around. I think there is potential for him to turn this around and of course turn this playoff run, but as kind of predicted by myself at the beginning of the season, the Dark Division is insanely competitive. We have, in my opinion, 4 teams already that are very good playoff teams, and if JKG wants to get into that conversation, you got 5 weeks to turn it around, and that is a lot of time, but there is still a lot of hard matchups to actually get there, so hopefully JKG can do that. As for the Bit Breakers, before this week, they actually did make a couple of trades. As I called out, Luxray did eventually get replaced and upgraded, as well as Decidueye Hisui, and those 2 Pokemon were replaced by Tinglu, and the second Pokemon that got added to the team was Lycanroc Midnight. I don't believe that Lycanroc's ever going to see usage. It's pretty slow, frail, and doesn't hit that hard. Um, Plus, it's a mono rock type, and it's a physical attacker, so it's just a worse version of Arcanine Hisui in my opinion. The only difference is you can't miss Rock Slide slash Stone Edge, thanks to No Guard. As for Tinglu, though, it was absolutely instrumental in this win. Of course, it does shut down a lot of JKG's best offense, and I think that there was definitely some better sets that JKG could have brought. In my opinion, I think that JKG needs to play his team a little bit similar to how we are currently playing our team, where you have to try to play offense first before you try to adjust to what your opponent's doing. You already know that you have 3 of the best damage dealing Pokemon in the game on your team. Try to maximize that, get the best value out of it. I've seen a lot of passive sets, especially out of Blood Moon or Luna, and I think it's definitely hurt the team more than it's helped. As for the light division, we had the Poke Rangers taking on the Calgary Flareons. Another sweep there where Volbeat, or Illumise did end up being the biggest difference maker here, able to match tailwinds and control the weather. Does mean that the Flareons had a really hard time getting their strategy off at all. Still, I think that Celadon put up a decent fight. In my opinion, I think the matchup was a lot better if he leaned into some of the 12-point Pokemon that he drafted, both Moltres, Galar, and Hisui and Gudra. I think were actually good brings this time around. Regrettably, they were left behind. So instead, Ogerpon actually had a great match in this set, and the Poke Rangers do end up getting that sweep. The next game we had in the light division was the Booming Swamperts versus the Infernal Infernapes. This was a sweep for the Infernapes, who got revenge for their loss in week 1. Again, it was kind of a similar story to week 1, actually, in my opinion, where Primarina was completely dominant in that first game and did a ton of work, including 4 KOs. However, in the second game, whether it was trying to confuse the opponent or do a quick audible, some kind of change up to try and predict what your opponent was doing in response, they ended up going away from it. And in my opinion, they got away with a lot. The second game was very, very close, and I think they probably should have lost it had a couple of choices gone into the Booming Swampert's favor. But off the strength of Annihilate, the Infernapes do pull it off in a 2-game set, and they get the sweep there. And the final game of the week was the Sunset Rose Meowstics versus the Cretaceous Draco Meteors, where the Draco Meteors did exactly as I thought they would in that first game and completely out damaged the Meowstics, and Parastrap was unable to activate. In the second game, a couple of misplays, and in my opinion, a little bit of taking the foot off the gas led the Draco Meteors to actually be in a really precarious spot, where there was about a 50-50 chance that they lost the game due to a double protect. Of course, they did end up winning the coin flip and did win the match 2-0, but I think that, in all honesty, that was a bit disappointing from the Draco Meteors. I think that second game kind of tells you that they're not 100% comfortable playing the playstyle that the team is best at. And similar to how I've been criticizing JKG, I think some of these teams have just got to get comfortable with playing offense and forcing your opponents to try and match you or adapt in some kind of way. If you have superior offense, you've got to press on that gas pedal, and you got to try to force your opponent to adjust to you. If you are doing the adjusting, you are always reacting rather than being proactive, which does mean that you are behind. But as I said, we got a couple of the predictions for week 2 incorrect. Both the Charge Beams game and my own game I did get incorrect, where I did take the Beavers and the Charge Beams to win, which does mean that we maintain an 8-4 record in predictions, which is not too shabby actually. That being said, looking into week 3, we have our first week of cross-divisional matchups. We have the Charge Beams versus the Flareons, and I'm gonna say here that the Charge Beams get their revenge here, and they finally start to turn it around. I think the Flareons are still kind of a tough matchup, especially that Galarian Moltres, which, in my opinion, has got to be a Pokemon that they lean into even heavier going forward. That Pokemon seems like an MVP in a ton of matchups, and I think if they're willing to spend more resources on making that Pokemon shine, it'll work out for them. But I will take the Charge Beams here, and we'll see how this goes. I do think that it should come down to whether or not either of these coaches completely commits themselves to the strategy that their team was built for. And basically, it's just going to come down to who plays more offense. For the Season 4 Sweepers versus the Poke Rangers, I'm actually going to take the upset here. I'm going to take the Season 4 Sweepers here in an upset. I think that the matchup is honestly not too bad either way. It does feel pretty even. However, of course, Fluttermane is an absolute pain in the Sweeper's butt. But I do think that it is kind of a scenario of if you get past the Fluttermane, you have an okay matchup versus the Ogerpon, and you can definitely get into a scenario where you have a chance of beating the team overall. So I do think that it'll come down to a little bit more creative team building because Fluttermane has such a dominant matchup this set. But we shall see. I do think that it is worth taking some of these upsets. And I think this is a spot where it could happen. We have the Bit Breakers versus the Cretaceous Draco Meteors. This is me kind of assuming that Dale starts playing the team in the way that he's supposed to, and I am going to take the Draco Meteors here. I think that they have a pretty decent matchup into the Bit Breakers, where the Bit Breakers do really have to rely on bulk quite a bit. But they have better answers for special offense than they do physical offense. And the Draco Meteors have both. So although Ting Lu will have a good matchup versus something like the Raging Bolt, the rest of the team really does present a lot of issues. And I think if Dale plays it correctly, plays offensively, and doesn't allow Trick Room to be set up, this should be a pretty one-sided affair. Finally, of course, there's still 3 more games. We're only halfway through week 3. Of course, we are going to be taking ourselves versus the Infernapes. Like I said last week, why show up to the match if you're not going to back yourself to win? I do think that this is a little bit more muddy of a matchup than our first 2. Of course, Rillaboom does complicate a lot of these Psychic Terrain angles that we can take, but I think that our team has a lot of strength outside of Psychic Terrain, and hopefully we are able to show some of that off there. But of course, good luck to Big Bot there, and hopefully we will make it a good one. Next up, we have the Tenstar team versus the Sunset Rose Meowstics. I'm going to take Tensor here. Golden Go presents a ton of issues for Sunset Rose's team, and I do think that this should be honestly pretty one-sided. As I said, Golden Go is a gigantic pain in the butt for them, and there is enough support on both sides to make this interesting. However, I think the Pokemon that is immune to all of the support that the Meowstics can actually put out does mean that this should be pretty one-sided. I could see a little bit of some befuddling happening, through a good use of Terra on something like Dragonite, or some sneaky way to get around the Golden Go, maybe with Zoroark, could end up turning the tides here. But I do think that Golden Go is enough of a big hammer to hit the opponent with that the 10-star team should be fine. And then the final game of the week is the Dream Park Duo Blades versus the Booming Swamperts. I'm I'm actually going to take the Swamperts here. I think that they have a much better team, and based on what I saw last week, the Booming Swamperts have been actually very competitive versus what are, in my opinion, two pretty strong teams, and they've used some lower tier Pokemon in order to accomplish that. So, in my opinion, that does mean that they have even more in the tank to give, but that also means that they should be favored in a matchup where they already have the better team. That being said, I also think that the Dual Blades could turn this around if they were to use some more, uh, in my opinion, powerful sets for all of their Pokemon. I also think that their team does need a bit of a rework. Hopefully, they either get comfortable with the team or decide to make a couple of trades before the deadline in week 4. So yeah, let's just see how it goes. Before we get there, of course, these are the standings after 2 weeks. There is obviously a lot of parity in both divisions. However, we do see that there are a bit more closely tied teams in the Dark Division. I think overall the Dark Division will end up being more competitive, and we'll have roughly 4 teams that should be completely playoff capable. However, of course, we can only send 3, so it should be a bloodbath to see who actually gets those spots. As for the Light Division, the Poke Rangers and Draco Meteors standing out for the moment. Of course, we will see how they do in this coming week. I think that both of them should be doing fine, and there's no real panic for them there. There are some concerns for the other 2 teams in the playoff race, at least currently, whether that be second guessing or having a very weak strategy to specific disruption. I do think that there is a potential for both of the teams that do not have wins yet to enter the playoff conversation, but I think that it will still be difficult considering that there is already a pretty big gap between the upper and bottom half of the Light Division. As for stats, this is what we have so far. Pretty interesting top 5 in my opinion. Of course, we see 3 Pokemon at 13 points, so excellent value position to be grabbing Pokemon there, it seems. I think a lot of this has to do with good matchups, but it also kind of shows that like that second tier of your team after your main strategy of 20 pointers has got to be just as good as your 20 pointers in order to be able to lean on them. Of course, we do also still see a lot of 20 and 19 point Pokemon around them, kind of proving that even if it's not necessarily a perfect matchup for those Pokemon, they are still going to be really important and impactful. But that is what I got for you for week number 2. Hopefully I will see you for our week 3 match. I'm very excited, looking forward to it. And with all of that being said, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.